We're talking with Jeff Garzik, the co-founder of Bloq and Metronome, as well as a core developer of Bitcoin. Jeff, welcome to the Strategic Coin Broadcast Network. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Thanks a bunch for inviting me.
Would you like to tell us more about Bloq and what role do you play at Bloq?
Our tagline is blockchains and beyond. It's essentially, I'm the CEO and co-founder along with my friend and business partner, Matthew Rozak. We formed Bloq in late 2015 when we saw that there was just a massive opportunity in these new networks. These new decentralized coins, decentralized networks they were going to change business. They were going to change enterprise, change how consumers live their lives, change how we interact with digital identity. And we thought that just drawing a circle around that and starting with the biggest businesses in the space, the Fortune 50, not even the Fortune 500, would be the best place to bring new infrastructure, new tokens, new coins, new networks into being. And we've seen a lot of success with that. We have a couple products. One is Bloq Enterprise. We sell that mainly to large enterprise customers. And then the interesting innovative side and the side that Metronome came from, Bloq Labs, sort of inspiration from Bell Labs or Xerox PARC, some of the innovation skunk works of the large companies. We saw, my co-founder and myself, that there was a key need for innovation to feed into, fund, exercise, and excite the more boring enterprise side of the space, that infrastructure, the wallets, the nodes, etc. You've got to have something to really exercise that. So we need the enterprise side of the house, the sort of more boring, staid side of the house. And then we need Bloq Labs, the exciting new labs that generate autonomous systems, resource management AIs, all of the satellites in space, the things that you read about in science fiction.
Wow. All right. I see. That's pretty interesting. Can you tell us about your involvement with the Bitcoin community and how it has evolved over the past few years?
Sure. So I began my career at Red Hat almost 2 decades ago, and I worked very closely with Linus Torvalds and the Linux kernel, etc. That career in open source led me to working with Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin. In one fine day in July of 2010, I read an article on a News for Nerds website called slash.org. And it talked about this decentralized digital currency. And I was a skeptic. I did not believe that it was possible to have a decentralized digital currency. So I downloaded it, experimented with it, proved to myself that it was indeed a new and indeed world-changing technology. And similar to other open source projects, I began sending changes to the founder, Satoshi. And wonder of wonders, he accepted them. And that's the basic open source process. It's all about merit. It's a meritocracy. The maintainer of a project reviews patches to software, changes to software. If they aren't up to snuff, they get rejected. They get some feedback on how to make it better. Satoshi accepted my patches, and I became sort of the third largest contributor to Bitcoin in the early days. I was a Bitcoin developer for several years, and then I moved on to starting my own businesses, and less on the engineering side, more on building businesses rather than software. And the end stage, the end goal was always take Bitcoin to where it's never been before. Take it to the developing markets, emerging markets. In Western countries, we already have essentially electronic systems. But where in the early days we were asking ourselves, where can we take Bitcoin and it was bring payment freedom to the entire world, bring this new decentralized technology to every cell phone on the planet. That was really what inspired me to work on Bitcoin, was the freedom associated with holding and controlling your own money and controlling your own destiny. And that was really what Bitcoin was all about in the early days. Everyone sort of saw a measure of success with Bitcoin. Of course, we all see the Bitcoin price today, which is just amazing. We had a party way back when called Dollar Parity Day, when Bitcoin hit $1, and that was such an accomplishment. And now it's 10,000 plus, reaching heights that no one really ever imagined. So that was Bitcoin then and now. I think that it's really the granddaddy of cryptocurrencies today.
Wow, yeah, I only remembered when it was like only $150, and that was I never saw a future like this, initially back then. Leading more into Metronome's side, what is the first thing you would want the public to know about Metronome?
Well, it's a new cryptocurrency. It's not a token that represents like a ticket to a football game, or a ticket to some cloud computing, or a share of stock in a company. It's a cryptocurrency. It's intended to be money. It's intended to be used in payments. It's intended to be used as a store of value transactionally. And it's money that's built to last. It's something that, unlike all the other tickers that consumers see, I know there's a new crypto nearly every day, it seems like, on CoinMarketCap. Metronome is designed to be here in the next decade, the next 2 decades, the next 100 years. It's built to last.
How does Metronome address limitations seen in these other cryptocurrencies?
If we had a clean slate, if we had a clean whiteboard, Metronome is a answer for what would a cryptocurrency look like if you were designing it from that clean slate, from that clean whiteboard. So we looked at settlement times, we looked at the longevity of the money supply, we looked at governance issues and drama and how to avoid drama. We looked at all these aspects and said, how can we improve on it? For example, on the currency Ethereum, which many people know, was never actually intended to be sound money. Ethereum, the cryptocurrency, was built purely as gasoline, as gas, to run these computing programs called dApps. And that's the entire purpose of the Ethereum currency. So it wasn't engineered from a money supply perspective. It was purely engineered to metaphorically be one of these tokens that you put into an arcade game to run the machine for 5 minutes. So Ethereum, quite simply, it wasn't built as a currency. And so it doesn't have these sort of one-to-many mass pay type features that a cryptocurrency really needs. If you want to pay 50 people, you have to spend 50 transactions worth of fees just to pay those 50 people on Ethereum. Whereas with Metronome and the Metronome Mass Pay feature, it's one transaction fee to pay those 50 people. So a mass pay feature is something that Ethereum was missing that Metronome brings. Similarly, on the Bitcoin side, Bitcoin is a bit painful to use today as a payment mechanism because very high fees, like $25, $30 a transaction, as well as you have to wait sometimes an hour or 2 hours for your transaction to be recorded in the blockchain. And so settlement times and high fees make Bitcoin very difficult to use from a payment side. And so we said, what's the best of all worlds? And that is taking some of these quick blockchain settlement times, for example, Ethereum's 15 seconds, and taking some of Bitcoin's best features, such as mass pay, put it together in one very easily usable product that's going to be there for decade after decade after decade. So that was really the driving design and idea behind Metronome. Take the best features from all the cryptocurrencies, put them together in one package.
I see. And who will be Metronome's maybe like ideal or initial buyers?
I think that the initial buyers are going to be people who will want to use Metronome either as a store of value because it's going to be there for the long term, or they want to start using it as a payment mechanism. So we are working on adding payment processing. Most of the cryptocurrencies, you can't actually use them to buy goods at a store. There are merchant payment processing type setups, whereas we're working on partnerships with at least 2 payment processors in the crypto space to add Metronome as a currency so that in the near future, if you have a web store or a brick and mortar store, you can let customers pay with Metronome. And I think that out of the gate, those along with traders and sort of the market side people, the institutional investors, institutional buyers are really going to be the ones interested in Metronome right out of the gate. It's got additional features, and we could talk about those, such as the auction feature, which is designed to very robustly and at market price distribute Metronome out to the public. And those features, while they are very market-centric, very market-efficient, Joe Sixpack, the average consumer, is probably not going to interact with a smart contract auction. And so that's more of the professional amateurs and the professionals and the very smart hobbyists who are going to interact directly with the smart contract.
Interesting. And I read that Metronome has an institutional form of capacity behind it. I was curious, what does it solve exactly for financial institutions?
Financial institutions are very much interested in a store of value and a currency that has been well audited, well engineered for enterprise quality, enterprise strength. It is going to be something that they can arbitrage and hedge against, because it is something that's very, very predictable day in and day out in terms of that money supply. And so that's very much attractive to them when they're diversifying into what is essentially a new asset class. Cryptocurrencies writ large, and this and Metronome specifically, are new vehicle, new asset class that literally just came into existence in the past few years. And so all of these institutional investors are re-examining their portfolios and looking and saying, well, we have this brand new asset class. Let's adjust our balance. Let's rebalance. Let's adjust our diversification strategy and add a allocation of Metronome.
See. And going back to Metronome's or like Ethereum's block time, I saw that Metronome's block time is 15 seconds, which is similar to Ethereum's. Will this increase if Ethereum fixes its scalability issues?
Its Metronome is analogously like a boxcar on a railroad. And what we mean by that is that Metronome is not a blockchain. It rides on a blockchain. And so it inherits some of the properties from the blockchain that secures it. And specifically, when Metronome is riding on the Ethereum or Ethereum Classic blockchain, you're going to get that 15-second settlement time. And so, yes, if Ethereum cranks that up, cranks that speed up, then Metronome will directly benefit from that speed increase. But on the other side of the equation, if you're running on a slower blockchain, like a root stock, which is tied to Bitcoin, then you're going to have a slower settlement time. And part of the Metronome system design is that users choose their blockchain rails. And that's a key part of the Metronome governance picture, is that in the future, if you want to move from Ethereum to another blockchain, then you can move your asset without your Metronome to that other blockchain. If that other blockchain has lower fees, if that other blockchain has faster settlement times, you can move your Metronome to that new blockchain, and you don't have to worry that your asset will lose value because you're going through a swap for another asset. It's in Metronome's case, you're just changing railroads, but the boxcar stays the same.
See, Metronome's governed by 4 smart contracts, I see. What are the 4 smart contracts, and how do they interact with each other?
Sure. This is, I think, as the designer, one of the most interesting parts of the entire system. Unfortunately, it's also one of the more complex answers. We have 4 smart contracts, as you mentioned. We have the token smart contract. That's the one that consumers will interact with. The send Metronome to another person, send Metronome to an exchange. That's the ERC20 token contract, ERC20 being a specification in the cryptocurrency engineering community for wallet standards, technical specs, that sort of thing. That ensures that we're compatible with other Ethereum wallets out there. And most notably, there's consumers would use a MetaMask parity or a My Ether wallet are the most popular wallets. After that, the second contract is the auction contract. And the auction contract, we can see that we have multiple auctions. We have an initial auction, that's our crowd sale. And it's a unique type of auction called a descending price auction. And this is where the auction starts at a intentionally high price for each token, and then it counts down until it hits a market price, and the token supply is sold. And amusingly, this is the same method that the CryptoKitties project used to distribute CryptoKitties to the outside world. So this descending price auction method, as far as we can tell, is the most fair way to distribute tokens at a fair market price. There are other methods, very, very popular in the I.C.O space, or pre-sales or private sales. We don't have any of that because it's literally impossible with Metronome. We kind of call it an un-ICO because the proceeds don't, we never put our hands on any of the proceeds. Every other ICO, the raise or the proceeds from the sale go to a company's bank account or a foundation's bank account or a foundation wallet, a company wallet. In this case, the raise goes to a smart contract that is managed on the blockchain. And that's why we call the set of contracts, why we call Metronome autonomous, is that Metronome itself manages its tokens and its proceeds. And that leads us to the third contract, the proceeds contract. This is essentially a self-managed savings account where the ETH, the ETH that comes from the auctions that are paid by consumers when they buy Metronome, that again does not come to us. That goes to a smart contract that acts like, as I call it, a slowly deflating balloon. So a lot of ETH goes into this contract on day 0 when the crowd sale ends. And a trickle of ETH continues to go into this third contract, the proceeds contract, each day when the daily auctions end. And where does that go? Where do those proceeds go? How is that used? Every VC slide deck, every investor asks, what is your use of funds? And in Metronome's case, That brings us to the fourth contract. Every day, every 24 hours, 25 basis points or 0.25% of the total proceeds balance. Let's imagine we have, say, 10,000 ETH on day zero. Our crowd sale was pretty successful. And so 0.25% of 1,000 ETH or 10,000 ETH or whatever is in proceeds will go to the autonomous converter contract, the fourth contract in our system. And this functions as a decentralized autonomous changer between ETH and Metronome. It's basically a market on the blockchain. And so if you want to trade ETH for MTN or MTN for ETH, this autonomous contract acts as both the exchange and a market maker. So it's essentially a way to change ETH for Metronome, be an on-chain MTN ETH trading pair. So those are the four contracts: the token contract, the auction contract, the proceeds or savings contract, and the fourth contract, the autonomous converter. And the final point is that every day a little bit of ETH drips from the proceeds contract into the autonomous converter contract. This essentially goes into the ETH side of the ETH MTN trading pair, and that provides an incentive for people to deposit MTN and trade that back into the secondary market equilibrium. And so I know all that's a bit complicated to simplify for listeners. It essentially buys Metronome on the open market at market prices every day. So that's what the proceeds, that's what the use of funds are. And that acts like a slowly deflating balloon, that proceeds contract. And we estimate that the proceeds contract will deflate down to a small minimum over 4 years. So this sort of provides some extra price floor, or a minimum support level for the Metronome token in its early days. So it's sort of an incubating or bootstrapping feature to provide this extra capital into the Metronome market on a daily basis.
Interesting. And speaking of proceeds, I was curious, after the token launch, how will future development of Metronome be funded?
No, that's a great question, and it's like everything else in Metronome, it's a bit complicated.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, the easy I.C.O route, which we are not taking, is that there's a person who manages some funds, and they dole out developer bounties and marketing bounties and things of that nature incentivized in that token. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build a cryptocurrency. And Bitcoin, when Bitcoin was launched, there was no Satoshi Funds developers picture. It was launched, and it was expected that businesses would build around Bitcoin as they did. Similarly, when Litecoin was launched, there was no question of who is going to fund Litecoin development, who's going to build Litecoin. It was simply, let's launch the best cryptocurrency and build a community around it. And so that's really the goal with Metronome, and that's how you get a cryptocurrency to be truly that top 10 cryptocurrency in terms of popularity, market cap, etc., is that you really want to encourage others to build on top of Metronome. And so that's the sort of 2, 3, 4 chess move down the road thinking that we're trying to engage. And so the short answer is that we are doing some Metronome development ourselves. We're building a Metronome mining pool, which is the world's first ERC20 mining pool, very, very unique. We're going to have a Metronome wallet. We're going to have developer SDKs and libraries available at launch. So we're absolutely sponsoring a lot of development ourselves. But again, we don't want people to depend on that. If we're building a currency for the next 100 years, we have to build a currency that doesn't go away if I go away or Bloq goes away. We got to build a currency where stealing a phrase from open source, there's no vendor lock-in.
Perfect.
And so we call that the centralized to decentralized flight path. Is you incubate, one company kicks off a decentralized network, but you got to have that leave the nest flight path. You got to have a point at which you release control and you give it to the community, and you let the community build around Metronome. And that's really what we're trying to incentivize, think about, and construct here.
Right on. Perfect. You mentioned Metronome is the opposite of an atomic swap. Would you be able to expand on this a little bit?
Absolutely. So a lot of confusion has been generated around this sort of cross-chain feature. And one of the frequently asked questions is that once a technical advancement known as an atomic swap is complete, then people will be able to say swap Bitcoin for Ethereum, Bitcoin for Litecoin, without having to worry about some extreme counterparty risk with exchanges. There is some volatility risk, exchange rate risk remaining. But essentially, a swap is swapping one currency for another, one asset for another. And there was some confusion about Metronome saying, oh, well, surely Metronome is just basically a swap. And my response was that it's the opposite of a swap. Metronome, going back to our railroad metaphor, is like gold packed into a boxcar. And when you move Metronome from one blockchain to another, that's like moving a single boxcar to a new railroad. That's like transferring gold bars from one warehouse to another. The gold bar didn't change. It's the same asset. And a swap, in contrast, is like meeting you in a parking lot and swapping gold bars for silver bars. You now have a totally different asset with a totally different market price. And so you have exchange rate risk, volatility risk, all the opportunity cost, time cost, all the risks that come with changing one asset into another asset. Whereas Metronome and the ability to move across blockchains, Metronome stays Metronome. You haven't lost any value by moving it to another blockchain or gained any value. It's the exact same asset. So you don't, for example, have a tax event if you move Metronome from one blockchain to another. But if you do a swap for Bitcoin to Litecoin, you do have a tax event because you're changing from one asset to another. So potentially you have a capital gain, a taxable capital gain in that first asset. So this is very, very key that it's not a swap. It's not an asset becoming another asset in any way, shape, or form. It's that same asset moving to a new security warehouse.
I see. And as it hops from, I guess you'd say, like railroad to railroad, what kind of blockchains would Metronome support down the line?
The blockchain set is, or the set of supported blockchains is really right now EVM or Ethereum compatible blockchains. Metronome is a set of Ethereum smart contracts. So out of the gate, it works on Ethereum Classic, Quantum, Rootstock, maybe EOS. So basically, wherever you have that Ethereum compatibility, you can deploy Metronome and secure the Metronome set of smart contracts. But ultimately, we like to say that all these blockchains, they're protocols. And if you speak the Metronome protocol, in theory, you can write your own, say, Tezos smart contract to support Ethereum Metronome, excuse me. So that's theoretically possible. We don't have any roadmap for that. If the Tezos team wants to tackle that, that would be fantastic. But the short answer is that Ethereum EVM compatibility is what tells you whether Metronome will work on that blockchain or not.
I see. Okay. Tying all this up, I guess in summary, how would you explain Metronome? I guess like an explain like I'm five version, like to a child.
I would say that Metronome is a currency that's built to last. It's going to be here for the 5-year-old's grandchildren.
And last but not least, very curious about this myself. What other exciting projects is Bloq going to be working on down the line? Maybe for 2018 or 5 years down the road?
Well, it's interesting you should say 5 years down the road. When my co-founder and I started Bloq, on the earliest investor pitches, we talked about, in 5 years down the line, we'll be building decentralized networks and autonomous systems. And that's what we're doing with Metronome today. And so this whole tokenization of things has really fast forwarded that scenario from 5 years down the line to today. So what we're doing right now, we're building autonomous systems. That's Metronome. We are looking at space as in outer space. One of our projects, Space Chain, of which I'm the co-founder under Bloq Labs. Space Chain is publicly traded on exchanges, and we'll be launching a satellite into space in the next 10 days.
Wow.
That's building a mesh network of satellites in space, a decentralized network. There is a semiconductor company, a computer chip company, that's making open source hardware, kind of like if you've ever heard of the Raspberry Pi. It's a little tiny computer that can fit in your pocket. We're building open source versions of that. So highly secure, trusted computing platform called G3 Semiconductors. We're looking at a very exciting project involving AI and local resources. This is Project Holon, and I really consider it the ultimate charity because it's all about making the world a better place at the end of the day. When I'm 80 years old, I want to be able to look back and say that we had a positive impact on the world. And Project Holon is something that addresses poverty, pollution, food quality, air quality. It's basically all about taking a bunch of metrics, hundreds of metrics, and adding AI and helping AI tokenize those in a way that you have economic incentives to have a greener house, lead a better life, to improve your community. And so a lot of exciting projects coming out of Bloq Labs. Bloq is hiring as fast as we can to build these projects. There's so many ideas and only so much time in the day.
Right. Wow, that's awesome. I'm gonna stay posted for that space one. That satellite one. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, if you're in China in early February, stop by for the launch.
Sweet. All right, thanks, Jeff. I think that's all we have for today. I'm sure we'll be doing a few more of these down the road. It was great to have you. Pleasure to interview you this afternoon.
No, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. All right, perfect. This is Alex Dyson with SCBN and Jeff Garzik. Have a good day, everybody.